So the Cal Bears have this interesting new setup that I think might eventually overtake college football if that's the way schools want it set up. If you haven't seen it, Cal's athletic director is retiring, and they are replacing him with a couple of people. And one of them is a general manager for football. Ron Rivera is essentially Ron Rivera, the former Chicago Bears, great Carolina Panthers, Washington Commanders, former head coach, is going to be the GM of Cal football. But that GM of Cal football moniker is really more of an athletic director for football. His job is going to be to oversee the football program to the point that current established head coach Justin Wilcox is going to report to Ron Rivera. He's not going to report to the athletic director. His boss is Ron Rivera, which is interesting because we've seen the GM title be used in college football and college basketball more recently in a variety of different ways. In some ways, it is a director of recruiting job. In some ways, it is a hey, I need you to take care of the finances and all that stuff. It's to take some of the administrative work off of the head coach's plate so they can focus on football, which makes a lot of sense. But for kind of so long, there has been a value on the head coach being the GM, the CEO of that football program. And that's not going to be the case at Cal. And I wonder how that sets them up for the future. Because you can look at it two different ways, right? One, Justin Wilcox, who has been just under 500 as a head coach. By the way, Cal's not the easiest place to win a bunch of football games, but that's neither here nor there. He can look at it as, I now only have to worry about X's and O's, recruiting, etc., right? Ron Rivera is going to handle the administrative duties, all of this stuff that I probably don't want to really do. And he's going to keep tabs on the efficiency, the way the entire program is running, etc., which could be a good thing. The alternative of that is there is a guy who has coached in the Super Bowl now hovering over my shoulder. And he's going to know if I make stupid decisions or what's wrong with our program. What decision, what should I have gone for it on 4th and 2 from our own 41-yard line? He's going to have real life experience in doing those things, because for the overwhelming majority of athletic directors and those who are in supervisor positions in college sports, especially when it comes to football, they don't have that knowledge and experience. They don't know what they don't know. Ron Rivera knows. Ron Rivera is going to know when you've made a mistake, when you've made a really poor decision. Ron Rivera is going to know if Cal has not recruited the best players possible. He's going to know that you should have done this instead of that. And that just adds an extra layer of scrutiny. And so I wonder if this becomes kind of like the new bargaining chip for coaches when they're negotiating contracts. Because right now, I think the big chief bargaining chip is they all want huge buyouts, right? If you're going to get rid of my ass after 2 years because I stunk the joint up, that's fine, but you're going to pay me a whole lot of money. And I've been completely under the impression or under the belief that programs should have just started saying okay, if that's the stance you're going to take, I'm going to find somebody else, because I'm not going to pay you $9 million a year to not coach my football team because you weren't great at your job. That feels like a logical step to take. And so I wonder if at some point it becomes okay, either you can have that gigantic buyout, and if things don't go well, sorry, but you're going to get fat stacks of cash, or We'll structure that GM position the way you'd like it to, because we've already seen an impact at the GM position where Andrew Luck fired Stanford's Troy Traylor, where he was like, hey, you know what? You are not the guy to lead our program anymore. We're going to go ahead and get rid of you. Because he had that kind of power as the GM of Stanford football. Meanwhile, other programs haven't necessarily structured their program that way. And I think this is bound to be a little bit of a shock to the college football ecosystem, because for so long, the head coach has been the kind of, for lack of a better term, the dictator of that program, right? They decide everything. Every detail has been decided by the head coach when it comes to those programs. That has been the perception and, frankly, the reality for a really long time in the sport. And for it to kind of see this seismic change of, we're going to get you the support that you might want or need from an administrative standpoint, so you can just focus on recruiting X's and O's. I think one helps benefit the lives of college coaches, because you've seen a bit of an exodus from, and not necessarily the head coach, but from coordinators, assistants, et cetera, going to the NFL, where all they have to do is coach football. They don't have to do class checks. They don't have to do curfew checks. They don't have to check on grades. They don't have to recruit. They don't need to pilfer through the social media profiles of 17-year-olds. They don't have to do that. They teach dudes how to play football good, and then they go home. And then they get 6 months off. And so if you get to a spot where the GM role has both a blessing and a curse, because they're going to have the power, where if Justin Wilcox is going to report to Ron Rivera, that means Ron Rivera decides the fate of the head coach of the Cal Golden Bears, or Andrew Luck decides the fate of the Stanford Cardinal football coach. It's just such a different situation than we've been so used to in college sports, right? And I think that adds a different layer, because we've seen coaches get a little antsy in their pantsy if there's an athletic director change. That's not the athletic director that brought me here. Something could happen. Now you're at the point where the athletic director is involved in the process of hiring the GM, but then also apparently the GM is ultimately responsible for the football program. And so it just adds another layer of a relationship dynamic that has to be intact, has to be up to snuff, and frankly good. There has to be I am still in a friendly, good spot with this guy and this guy. And so I wonder if this will catch on. I wonder if we'll get to a spot where you have GMs for the football program, because the athletic director knows that that's the sport that at 85% of schools matters the most. That's the one that if people of a region, alumni, etc., boosters, know the success of a sport at a college university, it's more than likely going to be football. Athletic directors are able to harness that as well, you can be mad at me, but this guy is the one who's responsible for football at our school. That's a layer of protection. And then you have head coaches having to wade through the idea of, okay, I now need to work with a GM. I now need to work with a athletic director. And coaches, as we've seen, haven't been great about relinquishing control, right? That Dabo Swinney famously was like, if they start paying these players, I'm going to find something else to do, because I'll be damned if these kids going to make $1 that should be going to me. Now, that's not necessarily what he said, but that's what he said. They haven't been great about relinquishing control. And so if you have to work in lockstep with, is it the coach's responsibility to find the GM? Is it the athletic department's responsibility to find a GM? How much does the GM weigh into the decision-making? Are we going to get to a point where you are paying a head coach to be the head coach and GM of the Clemson Tigers in a way to pay them more money? It just adds another dimension to the college football landscape that I don't necessarily know is all that great, but I just find this situation incredibly compelling, that you have an experienced NFL head coach who has reached the heights of the sport, coached MVPs, led teams to the playoffs, led a team to a Super Bowl appearance. Now overseeing a program that has been at or slightly below 500 under its current head coach. I think it would be really difficult to not view that situation as there's a guy sitting over my shoulder watching every decision that I make. And I know that should I falter or make the wrong decision, what have you, he can step in at a moment's notice and run this thing. I don't know that I would love to be in that situation. And I don't know how many other coaches would love to be in that spot either. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch unfold. And I just wonder if that's almost the trial run of this is how some programs are going to operate in the future. We're going to find a famous alumni. We're going to find a famous former head coach who, if we need them to, can get in here in a pinch and try to turn this thing around before we bring in our next guy. Because on one aspect, it's good for people to admit they don't know what they don't know, right? If you are an athletic director who have been in the past used a consulting firm or a search firm to find you a head coach because you don't know what qualities you think best fit your university, and you can say, I'm going to turn this thing over to Ron Rivera, who's this venerable football guy, there's not going to be a whole lot of people who are like, what in the hell are we doing? Because he's got that credibility and that name cachet and all of those things that come with that. So I wonder if that becomes maybe a bit of a crutch. I don't know, something to watch in the future as it relates to the way college staffs are constructed going forward. I want to know your thoughts. Do you want a Super Bowl, a coach who has appeared in the Super Bowl sitting over your shoulder, and that's who you report to now? Do you want that type of person in your program? Who is that type of person in your program? Let me know in the comments below. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on a podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.